time, yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time, time.
Well, welcome back to Tea Time. That's right, Miss Liz is back. I was here this afternoon with the incredible Audrey Gale, and she got to share a little bit on her book called The Human Trial. So check that out. You can check out that Tea Time on the YouTube channel and all podcast apps out there and stations. So tonight, I want to get you guys over to the YouTube channel, ring that little doorbell, and subscribe, and you will be able to see over 300 plus interviews from all walks of life, from all different countries. If there's not one Tea Time that resonates with you, I guarantee you there's another one that will. And that's how Miss Liz works. I try to get all different topics out there. So tonight I have the incredible Marie Powell in the house, and we're going to be talking about her latest books, Last of the Gifted Spirit Sight. So we're going to be talking about that book. We're going to be talking about her tea. Her tea is Respect, Explore, Attitude, Lifelong Learning. I did get the attitude in there, Marie, because we talk back and forth. So a little bit about Marie and disclaimer, and then we're going to spill some tea with all of you guys. So please enjoy. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz, myself, is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any show and Tea Time hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forward dialogues and opinions that are not representative of the giving time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants, for some where they may be emotionally at risk, it is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection, and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in tonight's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect those wishes and will see you at a later show at a later date and time. And again, all Tea Time shows are done on Thursday, 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If it's not a Thursday, it is a rescheduled Tea Time, a surprise Tea Time, or a special Tea Time, because Miss Liz does all of that as well. So now a little bit about my guest. Well, who is my guest? Well, Marie Powell is an author of young adult fantasy, including the Last of the Gifted series with Spirit Sight and Water Sight to date. She is the author of more than 40 books with such publishers as Scholastic Education Canada, Amicus Publication, I'm sure I'm not saying that right, Crabtree and Lerner, Lightning Bolt. She holds a master's in fine arts MFA degree in creative writing from the University of British Columbia. Marie's award-winning short story and poetry appears in such literature magazines as the Sunlight Press, Subterranean Room, and Transition. She is also a professional writer and editor with articles in more than 70 prints online and the broadcast markets. Marie lives on Treaty Foreland in Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm not saying that right. And her writing workshops are popular across the region. For more information or reviews, please contact her publicist, Mickey Mickelson from Creative Edge, who has given me Marie tonight to have some tea together. So let me get Marie in here and let's spill some tea together. Welcome, Marie.
Hi. Nice to
Hi.
be here. Thank you.
My tongue sometimes it slips and I can't pronounce something, and I'm just like, I know I'm not saying it right. And I'm from Canada too, and I should know how to say it.
Well, yeah, but many people, the Regina. Many people say Regina because that's how you say the woman's name, Regina, right?
Yeah.
Or the Latin term, which means queen, I think. But we say Regina. I don't know. It's probably a Saskatchewan thing.
Well, my biggest thing, Marie, is the way that I pronounce words is by the letters I see. And the silent letters give me a struggle all the time, right? So it's just like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
what are we doing with these letters, right?
Hmm.
So Marie, I'm going to take you back until you were a little girl. So who was Marie when she was little, and who is Marie now as a grown woman?
Oh, gee. Well, I guess when I was little, I was, pretty much telling stories to my next door neighbor. That's actually the very first memory I have of reading or writing. I have a few memories of reading and writing. Initially, I remember the moment I learned how to read in my grade 1 class when my teacher pointed to the word cat with a picture of a cat on the board. And I went, ah, cat connection, right? It was like from then on. But I had a next door neighbor who used to babysit me, and Mrs. Lowe. Thank you, Eva Lowe, wherever you are. Anyway, I sat down one day and wrote, the way that kids do, stapled papers together and colored in a book. And then I told her what the story was all about. And it was actually quite a moralistic tale about, I am actually quite afraid of bugs. So I have kind of a fascination with insects and things like that. I'm trying to write stories about them too for kids. But at that time, I was desperately afraid of bees and wasps and things. So I wrote a story about a bee that kept stinging people until people turned around and stung it. And that was back before I realized how good bees were, So, I mean, you learn things along the way, right? But Mrs. Lowe was quite the figure in my early childhood in terms of storytelling. And now mostly I write. I mean, I do enjoy reading out loud. Reading my books and I really like audiobooks. I like to listen. I guess that's the Welsh in my background. Supposedly people from Wales can sing, right, or harmonize or whatever. I think it's just a sense of being attuned to audio,
Yeah.
And so anyway, I don't know if I'm very much different than I was at 4 or 5 or 6 in there somewhere, but I like to think I've grown up a bit.
So Marie, how old were you when you started writing?
Oh, when I started writing, like I said, I think I've been writing all along, but really my first book publication was when I was 45, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I had newspaper articles and, magazine articles and things like that published before that, but nothing in fiction until I was in my mid to late 40s. Yeah.
So what got you into the fiction?
I think I always wrote it. The story that was my very first publication, my first story, actually sat in a box in my basement for 10 years. I wrote it during a class that I had taken in the early 90s. And during the critique of the class, there were 11 or 12 of us in the group and the instructor. And, everyone had the usual pleasant, comments to make and suggestions and things like that. And even the instructor, was pretty reasonable. And then one person in the group said, I don't think this is a short story. I think it's a character sketch. And so I went, oh, it's a character sketch. Because, the only thing you ever hear as a writer is the negative comments, right?
Yeah.
And so I in the box and thought, well, I don't know how to make it a short story. I'll just leave it in a box for a while and figure out what I'm doing. And the box got moved into the basement and, forgotten about. And then I saw a call for a little magazine here in Saskatchewan called Transition Magazine that pays for submissions, so I thought that was legit. And it was about, I guess, 2004 in there. And I noticed in the call that it kind of fit. It made me think of that story for some reason, but it also, Berna Barclay was the editor of that magazine at the time. She was an Order of Canada writer. She's passed on now, but very influential for many of us here in Saskatchewan. And she had written in the call that she would give feedback to everyone who submitted. So I went, oh, well, if somebody can tell me how to turn this thing into a short story, it'll be Berna. So, because we knew her vaguely, from different activities that had gone on here and readings and things like that. So I packed it up and sent it off to her and thought, I'll get feedback and it'll be good, right? well, she got 200 entries, but she gave everybody feedback, just like she said she would. So that must have been massive. Anyway, she wrote back to me a letter, and the opening line of it was, "I love your short story and I want to publish it." So that was a shocker, because I thought it was a character sketch at that point, because one person out of 15 had said that. Anyway, like I said, you always hear the negatives, right?
Yeah.
More than you hear the positives. And but that was the first thing I had published, and then I submitted to a call with Scholastic Education and had a wonderful, wonderful experience with a nonfiction book for kids called Dragonflies Are Amazing. Everybody loves dragonflies, it's my sort of talisman now, the dragonfly. But I went through the usual editing process and whatnot with a major publisher like that. And it was amazing. It was great. And the book that they came out with is gorgeous. It's a beautiful little book that's still in print today. And it has, really colorful pictures. It's kind of geared to helping reluctant readers learn how to read, which fits
Oh,
my profile really well, because what I do with my other hat on.
you
So,
have many hats, right?
yes, I have many hats, but one of my hats is to teach English as a second language, or as an additional language, as we say here. And I worked in a library as a programmer for 15 years. And one of the lovely things about doing programming at a library is mostly you're doing it for young children, and it's all about learning how to read. So that fit really well for me. Yeah.
So were you like that librarian that would read the stories, the little
Yes,
books?
that's why I think that's what got me into children's books, really, because I wrote whatever, poetry, whatever, when I was younger. But I started writing children's books partly because I took a class in children's writing with wonderful Alison Lohans from here in Regina. She's a really lovely person, and a very good mentor, teacher type person, and also an excellent, I think she has something like 30 or more books for children of all ages, up from preschoolers right through till sort of middle grade and young adult. And anyway, I took a class with her, but also partly because at that time I was working with the library and reading books to kids. That's, I mean, the best learning process for writing is reading, right?
Yeah.
And since I was reading all these great children's books to, kids 3 or 4 times a week, and going into schools and doing it more, it just seemed like a natural progression to go in that direction with my writing. So, yeah.
So Marie, what book stood out to you that you didn't write that you loved reading to the children?
So many, now that you've said that, I can't think of any, but we read 5 books every session for sure. And we did, finger plays and old nursery rhymes and felt stories and all kinds of things. I remember felt stories. I really liked the 5, 6-year-olds, the learning to read section, of when they're actually doing that activity, learning how to read. And telling stories, right? I used to have these incredible. The woman I worked with was a very good programmer, and she was very artistic, and she could do these great drawings on felt. So we had all these really great felt stories, and one of them was, here's 3 pieces of felt. If you were going to tell a story about this, how would you arrange these pieces on the board? And the kids would come up and, put the pieces in and tell the story. And it would be things like that, the way a frog goes from a tadpole to a frog, or, the flower going from a seed to a flower, that type of thing. So sequencing the story, and kids are great at that. And it was really fun to hear their versions of the different, it sounds like a really simple story, but you put it with this 5 or 6-year-old and you get some amazing story with all kinds of character in it, and, different types of flowers and different types of, and there was one with a butterfly, of course, becoming, a cocoon becoming a butterfly kind of thing. A caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, that type of thing, right?
Well, that brings
Yeah.
back a lot of good memories, those felt stories.
Yeah,
Because
I was going to say, and that makes me think of one, the Eric Carle story about the hungry little caterpillar was one that we used to read all the time. And there's one about, Jan Brett wrote a story about a mitten that gets filled with a mitten that gets left out in the snow by a kid, from the grandmother knits a mitten and the kids leaves it out in the snow, and all these animals come and get into it as the snow is falling, and the mitten stretches and stretches and stretches. And we used to act that out with them. We had a big piece of white fabric, and we would, back in the day before COVID, when you didn't have to worry about social distancing quite so much. But we would get this big piece of fabric and unroll it and get all the kids, to come be the different animals getting into the mitten. And then, of course, at some point, somebody sneezes and the mitten goes flying and the animals all fall out. And they loved it. We used to do things like that all the time. So it was more like improvisational acting or something than it was like reading, really.
I don't even know if they're still doing felt stories.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, because COVID, changed all that. We used to use puppets and all kinds of things, and they can't do that now in our library. They can't use the fabric hand puppets, because of the possibility of, they just don't allow that anymore. They don't allow fabric and that in the mix, I don't think. So, yeah.
I wonder if any homeschooling parents are using those felt stories.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. But it was a lot of fun to do that kind of thing. You can do it without fabric, I think. You could just, if I forgot the piece of fabric, we used to do it anyway. And I would just do it with my, I'm rolling it out. And the kids would all come and sit in a little huddle and then go flying when it came time to go flying too. So it's not necessarily that you have to have fabric, but it is kind of a fun way to do it. And you could do, maybe a piece of felt on the back of a piece of paper, have the drawing on a piece of paper, or something, or even a piece of plastic, colored plastic, like you could draw on it and cut it out and use that, I suppose, and stick that up against magnetic things, maybe put a magnet instead of a fabric. Yeah, right? I think there's ways around it. There's always ways around these things, right?
There's always solutions.
Yes, there's always solutions if you allow it. Yeah.
So Marie, out of your 40 children's book, which one do you recommend the most?
Oh, all of them, because they're really good. Like they're all. I did 35 books that are in series of 6. 30. Wait a minute, that's got to be 36 books then, right? Anyway, whatever the number is, 30 some books that are series of 6 that are geared to teaching kids how to read. And my dragonflies are amazing. Like I said, I always show that one because it's still in print and it's one of my favorites still, I have it on my website. You can see the very first book, I think, and the one that they say in the copy is my favorite is Dragonflies Are Amazing. Still one of my favorites, but I love them all. They're all great. I worked on those series with Amicus Publishing with a wonderful editor, Jenna Giesner, and we worked with Amy Cartwright, the illustrator from the US, who did all kinds of really great groups of children playing at in some of the different stories. These stories are like 100 words long, but they're very carefully chosen 100 words. It takes a fair bit of effort to write a good beginning reader that makes the kids want to read. Yeah. And I've had really good response to those. At one point I was at you do these book sales as an author, right? And it's kind of, I'll be honest with you, it's often disheartening a little bit because nobody ever buys books from authors at these book sales, right? They come and they look and they wander off, and it's like you're sitting there going, please buy a book. But anyway, the one sale I was at, or event, I guess it was, there were tables all of different kinds of craftspeople all over the place, and it was in a community hall here. And I was asked to come in as the local writer, so I had my children's books sitting out there. That was before these books, the Last of the Gifted series. That's a young adult series, but these other ones were children's books. Anyway, I had them set out, and this dad came over with, his kids in tow, a couple of little toddler type kids in tow. And he looked at the books, and the one kid picked the book up and asked him if he would read it. And he said, do you mind if I, and I said, no, sit down, read it. That's great. That's what they're for. Right. So he sat down with the kids and he started reading, and another little kid came over from somewhere, and another little kid came over from somewhere, and all over the hall, in the end, he had about 10 kids there, and he read them all of ended up being the reader and read them all of the books. Nobody bought any, but But it was a great afternoon because all these kids, like, it was interesting to see that. He started reading, and the minute he started reading, all these kids started to come, from all over the hall, wherever they were, and whose ever parents, I don't know where the parents were, but the kids all came. And eventually the parents came too, I guess, and stood around and watched. But it was really fun to see that. That's like, they're all books that are designed by they're traditional publishing. I don't publish my own, but the editors and the publishers do such a good job with educational books of making them attractive, especially the ones that are geared to reluctant readers. And mine are accelerated readers. The 30 some that I did were in an accelerated reading program. So the whole job of that is to get the kids interested, to get the kids engaged, and make them want to learn to read, and be excited a little bit about reading.
Well, I think it's really cool because it is hard to sell books. Anybody
Yeah.
that's written a book, it is hard. A lot of people come and check the table. They see
Yep.
what the book's about. Then I'll be back, but they never come back.
Well, and they're not cheap. Books are not cheap. Like the books, these books, they're I can't even get them for inexpensive prices. Like, it costs me to bring them in, and then I have to pay shipping to the US and so on. So I mean, I'd be giving them away, right? If I sold them for too little. But the one place that does buy them is schools and libraries. Like, I would just walk in with a set of the 6, and I, put them on the desk at the school and say, if you'd show this to your teacher librarian, here's my invoice. If they want it, happy, you can just send me the check, basically. And if they don't want it, I'll pop back in and pick it up, right? And they always sold. I almost never had to go back. I don't think I ever had to go back and pick them up. Basically they sold themselves, right? So to schools and libraries, it's easy, but they have kind of like a budget for that, right? Whereas, oops, sorry, that's I don't know if you heard that or not, but my doorbell just rang. Just ignore it. Anyway, yeah, it was very easy in terms of the market that it actually exists for them. Like I say, it's hard to get parents and grandparents to buy library bound books, because they're a little more expensive to begin with. And but schools and libraries are what they're intended for, and they seem to sell quite well and quite easily. So I've done a lot of readings through schools and libraries. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important I get them into libraries, right? We don't.
Oh, me too. Yeah, definitely. And we in Canada are so lucky with the public lending right. I mean, the whole fact that people here, authors here, are supported by the public lending right, so that if we get our books into different libraries, the government takes a look across the country once a year and sees where books are. If you register your books, they'll look for them in the different libraries, and if they find them, they give you a small royalty, for it. So I mean, that's incredibly valuable. That kind of support to an author is twofold, right? Because it gives you a shot in the arm. It's like, yes, your books are out there and people are reading them, and we like that, and the second is a little bit of money, which always helps, right?
But it also gives quality family time, right? To go to the libraries together and read, because the parents can pull out the books that they enjoy, and the children can pull out the books that they enjoy.
And I just taught Sage Hill writing experience for teens here in Regina. That's an amazing program for both adult and teen writers. But the one that I taught here was a face-to-face in our public library, in my local library here, Glen Elm Library, which is small. It's in a suburb, like a sort of a suburb, I guess you could say, of Regina, that's kind of low income in a way. And the library itself is gorgeous. It's got these big, beautiful windows letting the sunlight in. It's got all these comfortable spaces all around that, and the one day that we were there, the one morning, the library was actually closed, but there was staff in the library. So they said we could, go in and look around, right? They gave us a little tour of the library and so on. And everybody in the group, we had 11 young writers between 13 and 17, in the group. And everybody found a spot in the library and sat and wrote for a little while. It was really cool.
Yeah.
very quietly, everybody in their own sort of, and a couple of them together in the window seat at the window, and a couple others curled up in the big chair, and so on. It was like really cool to see that, and to see them making themselves at home in a public space like that. Like they say here, the sort of slogan, I guess, is to have a welcoming space. And I think the libraries here, we have 9 branches in Regina. Wow. Regina is not a big city. It's like, 220,000 or something like that. We're not huge, but we have 9 branches of the library, and I hope they all stay open because they're so useful for people. Both my ESL adult students, because our libraries also have books specifically designed for ESL readers, adult readers who don't want to read kids' books, who want to read some, like a small novel, something like that. And someday I'm going to write one of those. That's what I would like to do someday.
Just it's on your bucket list.
Yeah, for sure.
So Marie, how did you get into the youth writing?
The youth? How did I? I guess because my kids grew older, and I wanted, I started reading books when I read to them until they were quite old, 12 or 13. But also then I read books that they were reading, just so that I was kind of up on what was going on and so on. I know a lot of children's writers as well. There's a couple of organizations that I'm in that really help with giving you ideas as a writer about what you might write, or different age groups you might write for, or how to write for different age groups. One of them is CANSCAPE, right? The Canadian CANS Society of, trying to think of the acronym, but it's the Canadian Society of Children's Authors, Illustrators, and Performers. That's what I think it is. CANSCAPE, excellent group. There's the Society of Children's Authors and Illustrators, which I'm always saying is Squibby. I'm not sure how you say it in the States, right? There's that group as well that are geared for children's writers. Children's writers, in spite of, Harry Potter, most children's writers don't make the big bucks. It's like I say, kids' books are often, the market actually is schools and libraries more than it is people that would buy books in the way that people buy bestsellers and things like that, right? So there's a notable exceptions like the Velveteen Rabbit and, Harry Potter that will live forever and all that kind of stuff. But there's a wealth of children's books that are excellent books, really well done, really well put together, beautiful books that are just books, like, about them when you have kids, and after your kids grow up, you kind of forget, because you don't go back and read those, right? But yeah, being in organizations, I think, helped me a lot. Being the library programmer too, because of course there I was working with kids of all different ages. I did my preschool and toddler time, and I started a group just for the 5 to 6 year olds for a few years. We called Kinder Story Time. And then the middle grade groups, we had several sort of craft and book based programs going on. And then we had the young adults at that time, and we had young adult advisory committees where we'd get kids from the schools, try and recruit them in to, tell us what they wanted and all that kind of stuff. So that was useful for me when I first wanted to. They are very good at giving suggestions for what they are reading too. The kids in my advisory group were always telling me, "Oh, you got to read this one." And I'd read these books and go, "Oh, I love this. I have to write this." I'm one of those people. I don't write because I can't find what I'm looking for or something. I write because I'm inspired by really good writers, and I want to be one. So that's where my effort goes.
So how did you get this series started?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Welsh in background, right? And my grandfather was a Welsh speaker, but basically by the time I was born, I'm the last in my family. My grandparents were already passed on by the time I was, born, basically. And when I was a kid, and you do those activities in school where the teachers tell you, find out about your grandparents, interview your I had no grandparents to interview because they were gone, right? So, but I was always I think that made me kind of fascinated by them. So anyways, when I was in my 40s, I decided I'd better go to Wales and find out, what it really was all about, because I've been fascinated with it all my life, right? So I had the opportunity to take my kids with me, and we went to Wales on just a kind of a family holiday. And we were touring the different castles because, Wales is known for having 400 and some castles in ruins all over the place. It's a little teeny tiny country too. Like you could fit it in the far west section of Saskatchewan around Cypress Hills. It would fit right in there. It's little, compared to and Saskatchewan is the small province. PEI is the really small province, but basically we're a pretty small prairie province. And it's like a tenth of the size of Saskatchewan. So it was like, anyway, we decided we'd go and we were looking at all these different castles. And as we were touring them, I realized that they weren't Welsh castles. They were created by Edward I, the big ones, the Conwy and Beaumaris and Carnarvon, the ones we were going to visit. And I had bought all these tickets, right? Like you buy a ticket for 7 days or whatever, you can go to umpteen different castles. So I thought, well, I wonder if there were castles, the Welsh princes, because you hear about these Welsh princes, or at some point there were Welsh princes, right? And we happened to be staying on a sheep farm at Dolwth in northern Wales, in Gwynedd. And just beside where we were, about 5 kilometers down the road, was this great big ruin called Dolwth Castle. And so we thought we'd drive over there and see what that was all about. Looked big, so you could see it from the highway. So we thought we'd go in, and we got in there. And like when we had gone to the big Carnarvon, Conwy, and those other castles, there were people everywhere. Like it was big, it's sort of a tourist thing. There were guides to, you could buy a guided tour of it. You could get an audio tour, or whatever, and do it yourself. You could, there was a little gift shop and, all that, right? But when we got to Dolwth Castle, there was nobody there at all. We were the only car in the parking lot. There was nobody to take my ticket. I had tickets, but there was nobody to take them. So we were like, oh, this is weird, and there were all these signs, right, that were like people falling off of rocks. It was kind of like enter at your own risk, right? That kind
wow.
of thing. We're like, oh, where are we? Anyway, it was gorgeous countryside though, like a beautiful waterfall and, a gorgeous hills, like mountainside, basically, where you're going up, and this great big fortressy looking black, tower at the top of it. So we climbed up, and we went in to the area where it is. Like, it's not fenced or anything. It's just a bunch of old ruins, really. Anyway, we went in there, and the first thing we saw was the entrance was way up, like on what would be to me the first floor, the first story up kind of thing. It wasn't at the bottom where you kind of expect to go in somewhere. So we're looking at that going, oh, that's interesting. There was this kind of stone step thing leading up to it. So we went up and we went in, and there were kind of placards, like big postery things set here and there around the main floor, telling you, about how the Welsh lived at that time and all that. It was kind of like the old style self-guided tour where you are actually reading the little placards. You don't have the, earphones in, and you don't hear the wonderful actors acting it out and all that. Anyway, so we were walking around reading these and realizing, like, in that castle, it's all big, sort of one big room. And I guess everybody slept together, the men on one side of the room and the women on the other side of the room. And there was a hearth there that would have been the stove with the, like the kitchen, little tiny kitchen area sort of beyond it, but the stove to hearth, whatever, the furnace essentially, that isn't a furnace, like the wood burning thing, was right there that would have heated this. And stone castles are chilly, Anyway, it was all kind of one big room. There was an upstairs, and as you went upstairs, there was a battlement around it and all that. We were reading about the history of my city. The First Nations history in Regina is that for a period of time, the First Nations were told they couldn't come into Regina, or they could come in, but they had to leave at 5 p.m. or whatever. And if they were going to sleep overnight, they had to be in where the exhibition grounds are now. And, it was very restricted and all of this, right? And they couldn't speak their own language and many other things. And we were reading the placards, and it was the same in Wales. In 1282, they lost a war. And by 1284, there were all these restrictions, and the Welsh couldn't stay in the town overnight, and they couldn't speak their own language. They couldn't do business in their own language, with real threats like their tongues would be cut out, whatever, things like that. And this went on basically for a few hundred years there, and we were
Wow.
looking at that going, wow, because we had just been driving down the highway where all the signs are in Welsh, right? And the schools, or the girl that the farm family that was renting us the farm we were staying on, their daughter was learning in Welsh. It was a Welsh only, like in Quebec where it's French only schools.
Yeah.
They had Welsh only, like Welsh first language schools, and English was a second language and all this. So we're going, well, that's amazing. How did this happen? Like, if they couldn't speak their own language on pain of, horrible things happening to them, and they weren't allowed in their own towns and things like that for that many years, how did they come back with this, their language is back again and all of that, right? So I had to find out more about that. And we went up onto the battlements and we were looking around, and according to the placards, that area had been invaded in 1282 by the English, and there were in the surrounding countryside 3,000, somewhere between 3,000 to 10,000 English troops descended upon that castle and basically took it. And so up on the battlements, we were looking out, and I mean, just looking at it, one of the interesting things was that was apparently the first time that anyone is recorded using camouflage, because Edward I's wife and ladies, I guess they created all these white cloaks to put around the troops so that they could sneak up the hill in the snow, and I know snow, right? I'm from Saskatchewan, so snow is a very
From
common
Canada,
thing here.
no snow.
Yeah. Well, this was May, so there was no snow on the ground, but we were looking out, and I could imagine that. I could imagine those mountains, the long, long hillside of the mountain, sloping down, being covered with snow, and all these troops descending upon them, and looking out and suddenly seeing all these troops, like, wow, how scary would that be, right? This is not a big castle. It's quite little, I mean, it's tall, but it's like, and you'd just have your guys in there with you, your family, their families, their wife, kids, whatever, not, they were technologically outmatched by the English. The English were way more technologically advanced in their armor and their, fighting and everything than the Welsh were. The Welsh were fierce and ferocious, but, more like farmers, like rural, and everybody fought. There wasn't really, there were knights and, well-trained guys for sure, well-trained, both men and women that were able to fight, but not many of them. It's a small country, right? And just looking at that going, oh my gosh, what would that have been like? And I just had to write about it. I came home and spent the next 10 years trying to write these stories because, it just struck me. I'm actually writing the third one now. There's 2 out already. But I'm working on the third one now about surviving that, because what interests me is not so much the war itself. There's information about battles and things like that. But given that I'm from a farming area and that this was a rural kind of farming country, I was interested in how they survived, like how you could keep your language intact. My grandfather had apparently told my father, and he told me stories about how the Welsh, in his opinion, invented guerrilla warfare and, and kept the language going kind of underground in the mountains of North Wales for, to pass down. My grandfather was a Welsh speaker with quite an accent, I guess. So he really was a Welsh first speaker. Not that I ever met him, but these are the stories that come to you, if you start asking people about people who are no longer with you, and the stories you get are quite interesting. But anyway, that interested me. How did they get through it? How did they survive it? So the stories that I'm telling I'm using fantasy, I'm using Welsh legends and Welsh mythology. And basically, I have 2 siblings who have magical abilities, and they use their magical abilities to help their people survive the invasion of Wales and the war that basically where they lost everything. They lost their country, they lost their language, they lost their system of law, and everything. But they somehow survived it, and 800 years later were able to bring the language back pretty much intact, as I understand it, the way it was spoken in the 1200s. So that's pretty interesting, that you could kind of have that ability to just hang on to your traditions for that long, in such a way as to reinvigorate them, when the time comes, and you get your freedom again. So, which was, I guess, in the 1990s in Wales. Really, they had an independence movement in the 1900s earlier on, but it really gained the ability to speak their language and to have the schools in their language in the 1990s. So, quite a reinstatement, I guess you could say, of language and culture going on there, which I just thought was really fascinating, and something that is very topical in other countries and other cultures today. There's still horrible wars going on and genocide and everything. I think this story, how they got through it, is gives me a lot of faith in how we as a people are going to survive our century. So that's mainly how it all came about.
So Marie, in the books, do you write in English or do you write in Welsh?
Yeah, I had to actually take a couple of Welsh classes because I wanted to use some Welsh, given that my grandfather was a Welsh speaker, and that I think that reinsurgence of language is really important, especially as an ESL teacher. I look at my students all have heritage languages of different kinds. I have students from all countries, who are newcomers to Canada trying to beef up their English basically in my classes. And, that sense of speaking heritage languages, I think is very, very important. And keeping language alive in general, I think is very important. English is a conglomeration of a bunch of different languages. It's not a thing that existed on its own.
Yeah.
It grew out of trade and usage basically. And so that kind of I found was interesting. So I took a couple of Welsh classes, and I had a Welsh teacher. My Welsh teacher was an early reader for Spirit Sight and helped me out with using different languages and things like that. And I have had other Welsh speakers over the course of events. So I do try and use a bit of Welsh here and there. But I have I did a glossary of the terms and a glossary of the names, or I guess a table of contents of the names character list, that explains how to say the words. So I've got the pronunciation guide in with them, and with a lot of the castle names as well, because they look like they're hard to say, but they're not really once you get the gist of it. Anyway, it's like I wanted that to be part of it, but no, they're written in English, but there is a few Welsh words strategically placed here and there, and that sense of language is kind of part of it. That for example, the two siblings, one's a boy and one's a girl, and the girl speaks less fluently in English than the boy does, and things like that, so that they have their sort of language tie-ins, I guess, with it. And so that's part of what, I was looking at. Plus I wanted to, there's gaps in the research because after the war, Edward I, Longshanks, right, was the King of England at the time. His proclamation after he won basically said he had exterminated the Welsh, right?
Oh, wow.
By which, I mean, he was not a fan of the Welsh in any sense, but he basically burned a lot of the Welsh documents and, records from the war and records from before the war and records of the last Prince of Wales. So there really wasn't a lot kept, that would make him look good. There was a sense too in over time, like in the early 1900s, places in England that would have been in charge of education were very down on Llywelyn ap Griffith, the last true Prince of Wales. He was not considered to be a good person, and this, that, and the next thing. And there's a sense that one shouldn't look even at his, to find information about him. And that changes over the century, so that now we actually have quite a bit of really interesting information. But there's a sense like he brought the country together for the first and only time in its history. For about 10 or 15 years, he ran things as a unified whole for the first time in the history of Wales. And then they lost that. Edward attacked a couple of times and basically pushed him back into Gwynedd and North Wales and the Llyn Peninsula, where I took my Welsh language classes, basically, where they have been, the keepers of the Welsh language and culture. And the gaps in that research were really attractive to me as a writer, because I could fill them with, and especially with magic and legends, right? It's kind of like magic realism in a sense, that when you are not allowed to speak about things, you create stories about that. And, so there was a written Welsh language. There were several books written in Welsh, but there's this sort of mythology about the Welsh, that they're a very oral culture, because they had to be, right? Because after their records were destroyed, the only way you could get that from one generation to another was to tell a bunch of stories. So a lot of those stories, I think, serve that purpose. So I'm looking at the legends and the stories as ideas about the solution, right? For example, Edward took the royal seals of the Welsh royal, or not royal, they're actually, in the Prince of Wales is actually the first citizen of Wales. He's not royal in that sense, in the sense that the English monarchs were considered to be royalty. But they had seals, like where you would seal a document with your
with the wax
with
and
your
that,
emblem.
right? Yeah.
So that kind of thing. And basically Edward took those and he had them melted down and made into a chalice, which is a cup kind of that you would use in a church, and he donated it to one of the churches, and it kind of got lost. Who knows where it is, right? So I could use that, right? And I could think about what if, the other thing is my family, the Powell family, one of our, which is like one of the backgrounds, I guess, the family lore that comes down to you, is that we are the keepers of the chalice. And I always thought that was kind of mythologically referring to, the chalice of Christ, right? The Last Supper and all of that, the Holy Grail that the Templars had, and all, that kind of legend. But it dawned on me as I was reading this that the chalice might have been, what if at some point the Welsh had stolen it back and not actually told anybody, but used this sort of Christian myth of the Holy Grail as a way of saying, guess what? We have it back. We have the chalice. We are the keepers. So that's what I kind of worked with in the story, ways of using the sort of lore and the magic to read between the lines of history being kept by the people who won the war, not the people who lost the war. But I'm writing about the people who lost, right? And how they survived afterwards. So that was the fun part for me in writing these novels. And I think it kind of is what took me so long, partly because I was waiting for the research as people were doing it. I'm not a historian myself, right? I think I'm a pretty good researcher, but I'm not trained in history in that way. And I don't have degrees in history. I have degrees in theater and degrees in writing, right? And journalism, things like that. So that was the fun part for me in the writing of
well,
it.
and it goes right, Marie, goes right to your T, right? Because your T that you gave me was respect, explore, and attitude, lifelong learnings. And it's all about the story of your family and the history of Welsh.
Yeah, and how you can use that, right? How you can use those in reading between the lines, exploring the possibilities, is how sometimes you can get some really good ideas for novels.
Yeah.
Big stories.
I want to get into the word respect. Why'd you give me the word respect for?
I think it's really important. That's the number one rule in my when I'm talking to all of whatever I'm teaching. The number one rule is that we respect each other in the room, right? That everybody here is entitled, everybody here is equal, and we all have something to say, and to offer each other, and we can all learn from each other. So the word tolerance is a lovely word, right? I think, but it's not quite hard and it's not quite proactive enough. Tolerance kind of implies sort of a passive sense, but I think respect, if you're going to offer someone respect, they don't have to earn it. We all get respect just from the fact that we're alive at this time. We're all struggling. We're all in the same struggle, trying to get through. And so I think actively respecting each other as much as we can, reminding ourselves sometimes to respect each other,
right?
Is really, really important.
said, Marie, like, respect is not earned, right?
That's right.
We're,
I don't
we're
think
all
I hear
given.
people say that all the time. If you want me to respect you, you have to earn it. Like, yeah, I don't believe in that. I think, just being alive today, you deserve some respect. If you've managed to make it to whatever age you're at this moment, you deserve respect for that. And I think that, like I said, the more effort you put into working at respecting other people, the easier it gets and the better you live in the long run, the
Yeah.
better your life is, I think. Yeah.
So, Marie, how much exploring did you do for these books?
A lot. I've gone all over the
I
place.
kind of figured that because
Yeah.
that was your second word was explore, and just listening to you about the castles and everything, you had to
Yeah.
explore the castles, right?
Yeah. Well, I learned that way. I'm kind of a kinesthetic learner in the sense that I like to walk the walk. One of the things that drew me to Wales was the fact that I wanted to know more about my grandfather, and I had the sense of, okay, I mean, he's been dead for a long time. He left Wales a long time ago, and in my family there was this sense that he had sort of said, don't go visit Wales. It's all slag heaps, and they've destroyed the country and blah blah. And so we've moved to Canada, right? But I thought I just wanted to go and walk the walk and see what he saw. And when I got there, I was amazed. Like, they have reclaimed the entire environment and cleaned things up in an amazing way. Like, another good lesson for when we're talking in Canada about our sort of attempts to restore the environment and think about the environment and climate change and all of that. I think that's a really good lesson too, to see what's been done in some other countries, especially given what my grandfather had said and what I saw when I went there in person being so strikingly different, because they have really cleaned up a lot of the areas that he was talking about. And I was amazed by that as well. So, I mean, I think I get a lot out of that. I can walk in an area and, like I said, get up on the battlements and look out and imagine what might have happened in a historical situation. That feeds my creative brain. Not everybody needs to do that by any stretch. People can explore in a lot of different ways. You can sit in your armchair and read a book and get all kinds of ideas like that too, right? Yeah. But for me, the combination of those things and then being able to actually walk around in the area and see things and smell and hear and, just feel like you get a sense of what the remoteness of the country is. Because you think, like, the population of these countries is often bigger than the population of Canada, but when you actually get there and you see the spaces where people are and the spaces where people are not, and the spaces where the Welsh were actually living in that time period, where there aren't big cities. The big cities are down the road, where they felt it was better to have a big city, but the Welsh had their main cities in quite remote rural areas, and traveled around to those areas quite a bit in the 1200s. So putting that together in my head helps me a lot. It helps me to explore physically as well as mentally, because when you're reading, you're exploring kind of mentally and with your imagination, which is important too. I use that as well. But for me to get out in the area and actually kind of walk around in other people's shoes, so to speak, that's what I like. That's what helps me creatively.
Yeah, I like going into the history, like old buildings and museums, because I can feel the energy, or, I can picture how they would have sat at the table, the conversations they would have had, all of those things, right?
Yeah.
So your last one that you gave me was attitude,
lifelong learning.
Yeah,
lifelong learning. Yes.
So what's that all about there, Marie?
Well, I still take classes, right? I mean, I've got 40 some books, 46, I think now, counting these two, and the ones I'm writing now I'll be up to 50, hopefully by someday soon. But basically I still take classes too, as well as teach classes, I learn from my students, but I also take classes from people I think are excellent writers, or just who have something interesting to say that I want to hear. I don't think your learning has to stop when you leave high school or leave elementary school or whatever. I think you can learn in a lot of different ways. And I think you can learn, like, I'm 66 now, and I'm still taking classes. So I think you can learn right up till the time when you're 80 or beyond, right? Or I'm 101. I imagine you could take a class
You're just
then
learning
too.
at 80. That's what my grandma used to tell me.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to keep learning. I think that keeps us mentally fit too, in a way. Like it's a different process. It's good to teach. I think if you have a skill, it's good to teach that skill, because you learn a lot about the skill as you're teaching it and as you're seeing different people using it. But it's also good, I think, sometimes to let yourself be the learner. Go back into that process, and it makes you more um, sympathetic or whatever. It makes you more aware of what learners need too, I think, which is useful. Yeah.
Well, see, and I told you your tea would make sense to you when we got it out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Marie, if anybody would like to know more about these books, because where could they find these books? And it's the third book that's out now, right?
I haven't got it out yet. I'm still working on
okay.
it. Yeah, it's going to take me a little bit more time, but it's coming along. But yeah, basically my website is a good place to look. I have links to my website on Facebook and my social media too. But I think on the one page of my website, I have the books all listed, and there's a section for children's books and a section for the young adult books, which is growing all the time. I'm hoping to make it bigger all the time as I write more of them. But yeah, I would recommend my website.
And you have some workshops, I believe, that you do as well. Correct?
That's right. Yeah, and I have a page on my website for workshops as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm on Goodreads, and I'm on. I have an Author Central on Amazon. I'm in all the usual places, and my books are all over the place, like on Amazon and in the bookstores. And you can order them from the bookstores. Sometimes you don't find them physically in the bookstore, but they will be able to order them because they're available anywhere. Yeah.
So, Marie, are your workshops only in person, or are they virtual as well?
No, I do a lot of virtual. In fact, I'm teaching my CLB, my Canadian language benchmark class, completely online these days. Yeah, I do a lot of online workshops. I did one for the Saskatchewan Writers Guild in March, actually. But I also have been the virtual writer in residence. So I've done a residency online for the writers who are in rural areas of Saskatchewan. Because Saskatchewan is big enough that it would take you a few hours to get from from the north to the south or vice versa. So it makes sense for us to be online. And I use Zoom mostly for, giving workshops and classes. And I've done workshops for schools where I've gone in person, and I've done workshops for schools where I've gone in on Zoom and done it that way. And I'm happy to do either. Yeah. I think they're both really valid, different, but valid. Yeah.
So, Marie, you gave me the word persistent when I asked you to give me a word to describe yourself. Why that word?
Well, I'm one of those people that just keeps at things, like if I persist long enough, many things happen. I get success in the end, right? But also, if you make a mistake and you persist long enough, you can outlive your own mistakes, which is kind of nice. And also, like I said, just that people sometimes say, how did you get 46 books published? Well, you just keep doing it. You don't let things stop you. You just keep doing it and you get better and better. That's my hope anyway.
So what final message do you have for everybody tonight?
Just, I think it's really important to believe in yourself. And I think it's really important to remember that you are the bottom line, right? If you believe you can do something, then just keep on until you learn how to do it as best you can, And also, if you want to be a writer, I would say read, definitely. And even if you don't want to be a writer, read anyway, because it's fun, right? But basically, yeah, just believe in yourself, because nobody else is going to if you don't.
So, Marie, do you want to just read out your website for the audio listeners?
Oh, sure. Let me think. So basically, it's mariepowell.ca. So if you can remember my name, you can find me online. Marie Powell, Mariepowell.ca for Canada. Marie Powell from Canada. That's who I am.
There you go. Well, it was a pleasure having you, Marie, with me tonight and sharing your tea. I always enjoy these history stories because I love history. So be sure to go out and grab a book, check her out. If you'd like to reach out to her, check out Creative Edge, Mickey Mickelson, and he'll hook you up like he hooked me up. And
Yeah.
we will be back next week, same time, same place, and we're going to serve tea all over again, but a different TEA for each one because we do storytelling and words in Miss Liz's house. So until then, I'm going to wish you guys all a beautiful weekend. Make sure to take time for your family and friends, and we'll see you all next week, same time, same place, and we'll serve you another cup of tea then.